Annyeonghaseyo, this is meowmurai. Let's continue our game of Despera Drops, running on Nintendo Switch 2.
真実を見つけに行くよ。
さっさと行くぞ。
これでいいかな。
だって、やばいやつだろ。トゥーンで一番の資産家なんだぜ。そんな金持ちなのに、まだ儲けようとするだなんて。確かに、院長先生はさ、いつも借金ばっかしてて、すげえ大変そうだったよ。俺らを食わせるので精一杯でさ。でも、ずっと言ってたんだ。閉院したくないから頑張るって。それなのにあいつ、院長先生に言ったんだ。うちに金を借りて成り立ってるような経営は、そもそも破綻してる。続けるのは無理だって。
それは。
I couldn't defend the orphanage director. If he'd been borrowing from that businessman, the director likely hadn't had any room for objection. I could empathize with his boy. It was understandable that he was livid over an outside force snatching away the place that he loved. But at the same time, I also knew that there were two sides to every coin. The issue wasn't that clear-cut. I couldn't say anything to comfort him.
うちの院、いいとこだったんだよ。みんな仲良くてさ、先生もいい人で。俺、あそこがなくなるなんて嫌だよ。でもこのままじゃみんな離れ離れになっちまう。他の院がまともなとこだって保証もない。ひどいとこかもしれないだろ。だから俺、早くうちの土地を買い戻したくて。それでお金が必要なんだ。頼むよ兄ちゃん。俺にスリを教えてよ。
Hearing the boy's frantic pleas, Ram grinned. He was carefree, filled with childlike innocence like usual.
わかった。そういうことならスリのコツ教えてやるよ。
ラミー君。
だってすでに金持ってるやつが足りないとこから奪ってくってムカつくじゃん。ちびすけ、名前は？
エルマ
ー。よし、エルマー。じゃあまず大切なのは
Let's think of some other way.
ちょっと待って。さすがにスリはダメだよ。せめて他の方法を考えようよ。
他の方法って何さ？
それは普通に働くとか。
土地を買い戻すのに一体何年働けばいいのさ。下手すりゃ死ぬまで頑張ったって無理だよ。正直者が真面目にやったって損をする。世の中ってそういうもんじゃない。
そんなことは。
I cut myself off. I didn't have the confidence to declare it wasn't true. After all, I'd ended up here after talking to the police honestly. Still, these two are different problems. Even now, I don't think it's right to resort to thievery. Just as I thought, I realized something.
そもそもその土地の権利書を売ってもらえなきゃお金なんていくらあっても意味ないもの。だからどうしようもな。
I caught myself before I finished that sentence and covered my mouth with a gasp. Elmar looked as if he were about to burst into tears at any moment. Stealing was bad. I wasn't going to budge on that, but there must have been a better way to ward it, even if I was admonishing him.
お金があっても無駄って言っても、権利書があればいいんだろ。
それはそうだけど。
The problem was that buying it back wasn't even an option now. After all, the hotel construction project was likely already underway. I couldn't find a good way to explain it, however, and I held my tongue. Telling a child about such a reality was too cruel. Seeing that I fell silent, Elmar chewed on his lip as he glared at me. He turned on his heel and ran off. In his mind, he must have known the truth, that there was no way out of this situation. It was because of this knowledge that he'd ended up running away, feeling helpless and indignant. His forlorn, vulnerable back gradually shrank, almost like a lamb that had strayed from his herd. All I could do was watch. July 22nd, 2028, 2032, hostel.
だから ちょっと手伝ってくれるだけでいいんだって。
Sometime after we'd returned from our grocery shopping, everyone was lounging about after our meal as Rom repeatedly told the story of the orphanage we'd heard earlier.
せっかくこのメンバーならできるんだし、一緒に盗み出して孤児院を助けようよ。
バカか。そんな慈善事業やって何になる？
でもほら、トゥーンで一番の投資家って話だろ。金目のものとかありそうだし、ついでに儲かるじゃん。そうすりゃミカが嫌がってるスリもしなくて済むよ。
Burglary, like he's suggesting, is no different, though. But since I'd heard the circumstances directly from Elmar, it was difficult for me to argue head on.
そういう悪いやつなら、たんまり金目のものとか溜め込んでるんだろうしさ。一緒にやろうって。
何が悪いやつだよ。まっとうな手段で儲けてるただの金の亡者だろ。そういうやつこそ敵に回すと一番面倒なんだよ。どこまで持ってくる。
私も反対だな。今犯罪を起こせばどこにいるか告げて回るようなものだ。金はまたカジノで増やせばいい。
孤児院を救うヒーローというのには確かに憧れますが、正当な手段で手に入れられたみたいですし、さすがに気が引ける気もしますね。
だからって孤児院を潰さなくてもいいだろ。もっと他のことで金儲けすりゃいいじゃん。
てかそのトゥーンで一番の事業家ってこのおじさんだよね。確かにあまり評判は良くなさそうだね。
Sally effortlessly pulled up info on the businessman with her laptop and showed us a few news articles.
めぼしい土地の所有者に多額の融資をしておき、ある日突然返済を要求。規定の期日までに返済できなければ土地の権利を差し押さえるか。
確かにやり方は悪どいが、最初からそう契約書に書かれてちゃ太刀打ちできないだろう。だいたいこういうやつは最初人当たりが良くて返済はいつでもいいって話を持ちかけるんだ。他人を信用する方が悪いだろう。初めから土地が狙いだろうからな。ギリギリ違法にならない方法で手に入れている。ハミエルとは気が合いそうな男だ。
それって結局は騙し取ったってことじゃん。
あくまで合法的にですけどね。
その方が余計に悪いだろ。
まあおかげで敵も多そうだよ。これがお家みたいだけどセキュリティやばくない？
Sally showed an aerial photograph of the man's home. Even just a quick glance at the screen told me that there was security cameras everywhere.
へえ、いい家じゃないか。
敷地も随分と広いな。
こういう家って警備員とか雇ってるし、無理無理。サリーは絶対手伝わないからね。
そんなこと言わないでさ。監視カメラのスイッチちょっと切ってくれるだけでいいんだって。
それ全然簡単じゃないんだけど。
やるなら一人でやれ。
でも
With the title deed, we could save the orphanage. It was obvious that that was all Ram wanted. Well, whatever. He can just accuse him of stealing it. Obviously, it wasn't. Well, whatever.
姉ちゃんなら分かってくれるよな。エルマーと実際に会ってるんだしさ。みんなに何とか言ってくれよ。
I understood all too well. Even so, I couldn't support his venture, and I shook my head like everyone else.
ラミー君、私もやめた方がいいと思う。権利書があっても結局お金がなければ閉院しちゃうし、開発は止まらないんじゃないかな。
でもそういうのがムカつくんじゃん。だからちょっとぐらい痛い目見せるっていうかさ。
大怪盗様はご立派だね。でも俺は自分のためにしか動かないって決めてるんだ。同感だ。
そう言わないでさ。
Bram argued his case passionately and desperately, but no one was willing to consider it.
とにかくこの話はこれまでだ。
He abandoned the conversation with a statement, and everyone returned to their cramped private spaces.
いつまた逃亡劇が始まるかわからないんだ。休めるときに休まないでどうする？そんな面倒ごと。俺はごめんだね。
でも。
やりたいなら一人でやれ。これまでもそうだっただろう。
そうだけどさ。でもせっかく仲間ができたんだし。
だから言っただろ。俺らは仲間じゃない。ただの共通の被害者だ。得体の知れない相手からのな。カッターナイフ女とやらも、もしかしたらまた来るかもしれないんだろ。おとなしくしとくに限るよ。
そうだな。とにかく今日は休みだ。揉め事は避けてもらう。
もういいよ。
ラミー君、
ほっとけ。
Ram rushed out of the room alone, and no one tried to stop him. All they did was send apathetic gazes at the door. Indifferent exasperation was the only way I could describe it.
ほんとガキだな。
だが彼もバカではない。権利書を盗んだところで意味はないとすぐに気づくだろ
あとは問題事を起こさなければいいけどな。
案外一人で盗みに行ってしまったんだったりして。それはないですよね。
う。
やっぱり私、ラミー君を連れ戻してきます。え、お姉ちゃん？
I heard Sally calling me, but instead of stopping, I sprinted out of the hostel so that I wouldn't lose sight of Ram. Ram dashed across the cobble paving painted... Wait. Ram dashed across the cobble paving painted in the colors of the evening glow. He hadn't gotten too far away yet. Relieved, I quickened my pace and chased after him.
ラミー君！
Even when I called to him, he didn't turn around. He kept running as fast as his legs could carry him. If I remembered the aerial photography well enough, Ram was headed towards the businessman's estate. Perhaps he planned on stealing it all alone after all. Anxiety flared in my heart. I had to hurry and catch up to him. But no matter how much I ran, the distance between us didn't shrink. It hit me that I barely heard Ram's footsteps. Even though he was running, he was almost completely silent. As someone trying to catch him, it made things extremely challenging. It was difficult enough to keep up with an agile person like him. With no sound to rely on, if I ever lost sight of him, it was over. I took a deep breath and pursued him with everything I had, but my efforts were futile. When I turned a corner, Ram was no longer in sight.
ラミー君！どこ？
I looked left and right, but I couldn't find him anywhere. He had vanished into thin air. Maybe he was on a roof? I craned my neck, but then I heard a sigh from behind me.
もう、なんでついてきちゃうのさ。
Startled that Ram appeared behind me without warning, I nearly tripped. Ram regarded me with troubled eyes.
僕についてこられないって分かったら、その時点で引き返せばよかったのに。一人で歩いてたら危ないじゃん。
He pursed his lips a little, looking miffed.
なんで、こんなに僕を追ってきちゃったかな。
だって、ラミー君が心配で。
僕の心配？
His eyes widened, as if he'd heard a reply that took him by complete surprise.
うん。何かあったら危ないでしょ。
Originally, I'd come to stop him, but now, for some reason, I couldn't leave Ram be in his current state. I didn't want to leave him all alone. Something about him was different. I also didn't know why he was so hung up on Elmar's wish. What I did know, however, was that he'd lost his composure and was in a delicate state. Even if Ram was a great phantom thief like he called himself, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't be caught while he wasn't himself. I held out my hand.
だから、今日はもう帰ろう。
Ram's only reaction was a smile. It was a brittle smile, as if he was about to start crying.
危ないのはミカの方だろ。僕のこと見失ったくせに。
それはそうだけど。
まあいいよ。ミカがそう言うなら。お子様が迷子になる前に今日は一緒に帰ろっか。僕が面倒見てやらないと危なっかしいしさ。
Narrowing his eyes, Ram gave me an impish grin. Instead of taking my hand, he placed his hand on my head. He was clearly treating me like a child.
お子様って、ラミー君の方が年下でしょ。
へえ、僕の方が年上だと思うけどな。ま、どうでもいいか。それじゃ、一緒ってことで。
How am I supposed to interpret that? Maybe he was actually a bit older than I'd assumed. I stared long and hard at his face, but it didn't help. I just couldn't guess. Even back at uni, there had been several people I'd assumed were older, but turned out to be my age. In any case, I was glad that Ram changed his mind and was willing to head back. Breathing a sigh of relief, we began retracing our steps. But then...
エルマどこですか?
We saw a panicked man running in our direction from a distance.
エルマーって。
The boy we'd met earlier in the day flashed across my mind. The two of us exchanged glances, and in the next moment, the flustered man approached us.
すみません。エルマを。赤毛の男の子を見ませんでしたか? 背丈は私の胸くらいで、少しやんちゃそうで。
もしかしてそのエルマーって、旧市街の孤児院にいるエルマーのこと？
ご存知なんですか?
いや、僕らが会ったのは昼だけど。
もしかして、あなたが孤児院の院長さんですか？
ええ。私はこの町で孤児院の院長をしているローラント・ハネスというものです。実は、エルマーが夕食の支度の時間になっても帰ってこないので探しているのですが。お二人が昼に会った時、エルマーは何と話していましたか？あ、一体どこへ行ったのか。
It can't be. I recalled the conversation we'd had with Elmar, and an ominous possibility crept into my mind. What if Elmar decided to try and steal the title deed just like Ram had earlier?
院長先生、大変です。エルマーのベッドにこんなものが。
Suddenly, a woman rushed up to Director Hans, maybe a staff member of the orphanage, and handed over a hastily written note. The moment he saw it, Director Hans' face paled.
なんと、バカなことを。すみません。失礼します。
The pair hurriedly left us behind. Their reactions implied that something big had happened. My unease grew.
ねえ、ラミー君。エルマー君はまさか、権利書を盗みに行っちゃったんじゃ。
そのまさかみたいだよ。さっきの手紙、盗み見たんだけど、権利書を手に入れてくるって書かれてた。
そんな。
お金があっても無駄って言っても、権利書があればいいんだろう。
So that's what he meant back then. He hadn't been running back to the orphanage out of frustration. He ran betting everything on a sliver of hope.
どうしよう。私があんなことを言ったから。
Elmar had said he wanted to raise money to buy back the title deed himself, but I thoughtlessly told him that it was meaningless. Words were meant to warn him against stealing, instead spurred him to commit greater crimes. It's meaningless if that man isn't willing to sell the title deed to you. If I hadn't said those fatal words, he would have never thought of stealing the title deed itself, or at least he wouldn't have acted so brashly. I should have made sure to explain it clearly instead of mincing my words. I should have said that the situation was already out of his hands. My half-baked statement had triggered a nightmare scenario. No matter how cruel it was my responsibility to help him face reality. I'd failed.
なら、助けに行く。
助けに行くって。
エルマーのいる場所は分かってるじゃん。あくまで人助けってことなら、屋敷に忍び込んでもいいだろ。
Rom was the same as always, so much so that I almost wanted to cry. His face wasn't that of someone enticing me to sin or reproaching me for my crimes. Let's sneak into the estate. He made that offer casually, lightheartedly, as if inviting me to go on a shopping trip.
でも。
このままじゃ、寝覚めも悪いだろ。それに、もともと一人でも僕は潜り込むつもりだったしさ。ま、僕一人で行って、姉ちゃんは先に宿へ帰っててもいいけど。
それはダメ。
なら、一緒に行こうよ。
His soft smile was brimming with kindness, but his invitation was a temptation to sin. If I nodded, I would be breaking and entering that estate. But then again, I'd already committed a sin by leading that boy down a dark path. My irresponsible statement had been the trigger. Leaving it all to Ram to save him and going back without a care was simply egregious. Furthermore, even if I didn't go, Ram would. And if I let him leave alone, I was certain he wouldn't stop at just saving Elmar. I'd seen the faint traces of wrath in his fingertips. I didn't know what terrible things it could lead to, and so I hardened my resolve and nodded.
わかった。一緒に行く。
よし、来た。
Ram began sprinting across the cobblestone dyed by the sunset. Once again, he barely made a sound. I chased after him to stop him, but the tables had turned on me, and I'd become his accomplice instead. I had to stop the young boy who was on his way to breaking the law because of my blunder. I prayed with all my heart that he hadn't snuck in yet. July 20th, 2028, 21:44, outside the mansion. By the time we'd arrived at the estate, night had pulled over its curtain of darkness. Just like Sally predicted, there were guards standing at attention at the mansion's front entrance. So that we wouldn't catch their eyes, we evaded the gate and cameras and took a lap around the estate walls. When we reached a certain spot, Ram stilled.
やっぱエルマー、ここに入ってったみたいだな。
どうしてわかったの？
ほら、ここ、登った足跡があるだろう。この小ささは多分、エルマーだと思う。
I imagined a young boy frantically scaling the wall and felt my heart break a little. We needed to find him as soon as possible and bring him back.
まだ見つかってないといいんだけど。
ま、ちっこいと意外と目立たないからな。早く迎えに行こうぜ。
Ram dashed to another spot. He soon stopped in front of a different part of the wall.
監視カメラがなくて警備が手薄なのは、やっぱここかな。じゃあ入るよ。
The moment he finished his sentence, Ram leaped upward without a sound. In a blink, he was on top of the wall. He'd been as graceful as a cat.
ほら、ミカも同じように飛んで。
Why, you want me to do that?
同じように。
I tried to jump as hard as I could as a test, but it wasn't even marginally similar to his. My outstretched hands barely reached the top of the wall.
これしか飛べないの？
ごめんね。やっぱりラミー君一人で。
しょうがないな。ほら、これに捕まって。
Ram detached the pouch attached to his waist and dangled the belt down to me. I grabbed it, and he pulled me up with an unexpectedly strong force.
よいしょっと。ほら、登れた。
ありがとう。
I somehow managed to claw my way up and ended up crawling on all fours on top of the wall. The next moment, I saw Ram's face right in front of my eyes.
ラミク
Startled, I almost yelled, but Ram reached out and placed his finger before my lips.
し大きな声を出しちゃダメだって。
ごめん。
The momentum of my nod almost made me lose balance and tumble down, but I clenched my arms and hands and somehow held on.
そんなにおっかなびっくりしなくてもいいのにさ。
I must have been extremely pathetic sight because Ram chuckled in a hushed voice.
そんなこと言われても怖いよ。
I was roughly a mere 3 meters tall, but because of the darkness below us, the wall seemed higher than that.
高いって思うから怖いんだよ。地面の上だと思えばいいじゃん。
Ram's advice was downright unreasonable.
道路に引かれた白線の上を歩けって言われたら怖がらずにできるだろ。それと同じ。いや、この塀の方が幅が広いくらいだよ。
無理だから。結構高いし。
それじゃあ下を見ないで上を見なよ。ほら、月があんなに綺麗だ。
Hearing that, I kept my head still but shifted my gaze up to the night sky. The moon above was enchanting, and I gasped at its beauty.
世界一大きな宝石さ。
Despite our urgent quest, Ram stared at the moon with a peaceful expression.
塀の上にいると月に手が届きそうだろ。でも絶対に届かない。本当に大切なものって誰にでも平等に与えられるけど、決して誰のものにもならないんだよ。
Under the moonlight, his face seemed more mature than usual, and I was captivated by the sight. By him.
どうしてラミー君は泥棒になったの？
どうしたのさ、突然。
Ram looked back to me, puzzled. It was those eyes again. When I stared at those clear and pure eyes, I couldn't think of him as a petty criminal. The question had slipped out.
だってラミー君は器用だし、運動神経もいいし、別に泥棒やスリなんかしなくても普通に暮らせると思うから。
普通か。普通ってなんだろうね。
As he wistfully whispered those words, he looked lonely. He felt far away.
ああ、いや、ほら、だってさ、普通に考えたら盗んだ方が楽じゃん。僕は楽したいだけだよ。
He flashed me a faint smile before pointing to the other side of the wall, to the mansion's garden.
さてと、それじゃあ、そろそろ行こっか。
I was disappointed he evaded my question, but he made a good point. We couldn't chat on here forever.
降りるときは足音を立てないように気をつけて。つま先から伸びるように降りるんだ。わかった？
うん、わかったけど、私にできるかな。
Sound wasn't the only problem. I was worried I wouldn't even be able to jump down from here to begin with.
大丈夫。僕が先に降りて、ちゃんと安全を確認するから。
Ram dropped down into the garden like a feather. I marveled at his dexterity. Naturally, I couldn't copy his landing. A voice in the back of my head said if I was going to be dead weight, I should head back now.
おいでよ。大丈夫。地面は柔らかいから、絶対に怪我しないって。
Ram's whisper urged me to move, albeit gently. Either way, I couldn't cling to the top of the wall by myself forever. It's do or die. Hardening my resolve, I jumped. Just like he said, the ground was soft and I barely felt an impact. After that, I took tips from Rom about my way of walking as we fervently snuck through the garden. Eventually, managing to evade the eyes of the guards and the security cameras, we crept into the mansion. It was quiet inside. There wasn't anyone around.
エルマー君、どこにいるんだろう。
We tiptoed down the silent corridor, cautious so our footsteps wouldn't echo. Rom's ears were perked up, looking almost like a cat as he swished his head back and forth, surveying the surroundings. He tugged on my sleeve.
ミカはここでちょっと待ってて。部屋の中入って確かめてくるから。
ここって。
The place Rom pointed to was a small alcove cloaked in shadow.
壁に耳つけとけば人の足音に気づくから。遠くから聞こえてきたらすぐに僕に合図して。
わかった。
I wasn't sure whether I could pull it off, but it was my only option. Rom chuckled at my nervous nod.
そんなガチガチに緊張してたら自分の心音で足音にも気づけないって。ほら、リラックスして。
That's easier said than done, though. If someone found us, we were done for. I pictured them calling the police and handing us over, and my stress levels only rose. I gulped and pressed my ear to the wall, but just like he'd said, all I could hear was my own pulse. Maybe as a gesture to quell my anxiety, Rom placed a hand on my shoulder, gave me his signature merry grin, and looked into my eyes.
なら、僕の目を見てよ。どんな。
Why is he asking me that now?
ほら、いいから。見て。
Though baffled, I did as I was told. Even with so little light in the hallway, his green eyes sparkled brilliantly.
何色に見える？
緑色だけど。
どんな緑色？
エメラルドみたいで。すごく綺麗。
ん？よし。これでちょっとは落ち着いたんじゃない？
I placed a hand against my chest and realized my heartbeat was much less erratic than earlier.
本当だ。
な？こうやって一個のことに集中するとちょっと落ち着くんだよ。これ、大怪盗の秘密のテクニック、その後な。
その後？
その4までは、塀を越えるまでに教えただろ。
When I scaled the wall and when I jumped down, that should only make 2 tips, though.
にしてもまさか、初弟子がエルマーじゃなくて、ミカになるとはな。
弟子？
あれ？相棒の方が良かった？二人組怪盗ってのも、まあ悪くないよね。
We exchanged trivial banter completely out of place during a home invasion, and he was likely doing it to help calm my nerves. Seeing that I'd completely regained my mind, Rom released my shoulder and pulled his hand away.
とにかくそこで待ってて。すぐ戻るから。
Rom went ahead to check the nearby rooms one by one. He pressed his ear against the door, opened it, and went in, then out. The cycle repeated. During the entire process, never once did Rom make any audible sound. If I wasn't watching him, I'd have never guessed that he was around. When he came out of the third door, Rom returned to my side. Looking slightly solemn, he gazed at the ceiling.
多分、あそこの部屋の上の階にいると思う。途切れ途切れだけど、声が聞こえたから。
エルマー君、捕まってるの？大丈夫そうだった？
うん。声は元気そうだったし、文句言ってるみたいだったよ。少なくとも、殴られたりはしてない。今は。
His tone was terse. The words "for now" stirred in my trepidation.
捕まったってことは警察も呼ばれてるかもしれないし、とにかく急ごう。
We had to rescue Elmar before the police arrived and escape without being discovered. Moving quietly, just like Rom had taught me, I ran desperately down the corridor. Switzerland. Thun, July 20th, 2028, 22:24, Thursday, mansion, second floor. We took cover and stealthily advanced to the next floor. As we approached the room where Elmar was, a ruckus reached my ears.
離せよこのクソ親父俺らの孤児院を返せよ
いいから静かにしろ。くそ、どうすんだよこいつ。
例の孤児院のガキだろ。騒ぎを大きくすると事業計画にケチがつくから、警察には通報するなってボスの命令だ。
通報はするなって。じゃあどうしろと。
現場で判断して対応しろとのことだ。
どうせ自分は今頃新しい女を連れ込んでるってのに、俺たちには面倒を押し付けていい身分だな。かといってこのまま放り出したら俺たちが責任を取らされるか。
ああ、この屋敷には何者も入り込まなかったことにしなきゃならない。つまり証拠は何も残すわけにはいかないってことだ。
つまりそういうことか。悪いな坊主。
ラミー君。
If we didn't hurry and rescue him, Elmar would be in grave danger. I turned around and realized that all emotion had been wiped from Ram's face. He could only stare at the door with a deathly pale complexion. His lips quivered.
ダメだ。
It was evident that he'd lost his composure. Gritting his teeth, Ram reached out his hand, intent on opening the door. I immediately blocked his way.
待って、いきなり入ってどうするの？
It was obvious that two adult men, guards no less, were inside. Entering without a plan would only mean that we'd be caught alongside Elmar.
でも、急がないと。
Ram was completely panicked. It was hard to believe that moments earlier he'd snuck around looking as if he were on a walk in a park. I stared into his agitated, distressed eyes, just like how he'd helped me gather my wits earlier. This time I needed to handle the situation. A guard mentioned that the businessman had brought a woman home. Maybe I could create an opening with that.
なら、まず私が入るよ。屋敷の主人に呼ばれてきた恋人のふりをして気を引くから、その隙にラミー君がエルマー君を連れ出して。
そんなことしたらミカが。
時間がないもの。
If we were in a situation where we could afford to wait, we could have possibly rescued Elmar when they left the room during a break. But judging by their conversation, time was of the essence. Even knowing it was reckless, I had to go in.
そう長くは騙せないと思うけど、ラミー君はエルマー君をよろしくね。
I kept my eyes locked with his as I spoke, and it seemed that Ram was slowly but surely regaining his rationality. His short, shallow breathing gradually grew long and steady.
わかった。ミカが警備員の注意を引きつけた一瞬の隙を使って、僕がエルマーを救出して逃げる。助け出せたら一緒にミカも逃げて、はぐれないようについてきてよ。いい？
うん、わかったよ。
I nodded to him before I took several deep breaths. During times like these, confidence was key. Acting timid as the businessman's lady would blow my cover right away. I didn't have an impressive physical abilities like Ram. I wasn't strong like Gib and Ash, but in terms of acting like a normal person, I could manage. I gave Ram a signal with my eyes before knocking on the door.
ちょっといいかしら？彼に頼まれたんだけど。
あんた、誰だ？
おい、ボスの新しい女じゃないか？
そうよ。ちょっと開けてくれないかしら？
The door swung open into the room. Ram had already taken cover in a place that was a blind spot to the people inside. One guard walked out. I almost flinched, but I endured and kept up the pretense.
あの人が頼んでいたワインが部屋にないって怒ってるんですけど。
ワインですか？いや、そういう話は厨房の係にでも言ってもらえませんかね。
My act must have been convincing enough, since the guard's attitude was now somewhat humble.
その厨房がどこかわからなくて、案内していただけませんか？
I acted this as if I was pleading him for his help, and the guard turned around to face the other one.
おい、お前この人厨房まで。
Both of them were looking away. Rom didn't miss that opening. Sprinting like the wind itself, he slipped by the guard, talking to me, and rushed over to Elmar inside the room. Rom took out a small knife from his inner pocket, cut the ropes restraining Elmar, and grasped the boy's hand.
行くよ。
は？なんだ？いつ入ってきたガキ！
おい、こら待て！
The guard who'd been attending to me reached out his hand to seize Rom and Elmar. The pair slid through the space between his legs and got away.
Mika!
Oh, maybe don't say my name, but okay. On Ram's cue, I ran for the hills. Enraged, hollering roared behind us.
待てよ、お前たち！
くそ！騙しやがったあいつ！侵入者2名！先に入ったガキを連れて逃走中だ！見つけ次第捕らえろ！
I overheard the pair alerting other guards through their comms.
師匠、どうしてここに？
エルマーを助けに来たに決まってるだろ。それよか、どうやって脱出するかだよ。まずは。
We were about to run down the stairs when we came to a stop. We heard the bustle of people coming up from below.
くそ、鉢合わせはまずいって。上行くよ。
Rom scaled the stairs and got onto the third floor, but there were guards even there.
いたぞ！あいつらだ！
やば！
We climbed up the stairs, we ran down the corridors, and at times we hid in rooms, waiting for an opportunity to get away with bated breath. Rom was naturally a fast runner, and so was Elmar. I ran with everything I had so I wouldn't fall behind, but now I'd completely lost track of where I was. The next thing I knew, I'd lost track of Rom and Elmar too. No, they were in front of me just seconds ago. I didn't have the luxury of standing around confused. The footsteps of guards chasing me steadily edged closer. My best option right now is to hide. Praying that there was no one inside, I dove into the closest room. I quietly latched the door shut before surveying the gloomy interior. It was a guest room that didn't seem much use. I was alone. Can I get out from the windows? I walked up to one and pulled aside the curtains, but there were sturdy metal bars fixed to the frame, likely a measure against thieves. Looking outside, I was currently on the mansion's second floor. If I wanted to escape without breaking a bone, I'd have to get down to the first floor. But could I really manage such a feat when guards were everywhere, hunting for us? As the dim room began to feel like a cage, my phone vibrated with a text. I was so startled that I nearly shrieked. I fumbled for my phone, thinking it was Rom, but when I unlocked my screen, I saw a note from Sally. The content was succinct. Turn on your earpiece. Curious, I switched on the earpiece. Without delay, Sally's raised voice nearly bust my eardrum.
もうお姉ちゃん、どうしてそんなとこにいるの？サリー、そんなとこって私がどこにいるか知ってるの？
Yeah, Mika definitely has a streak of bad luck. At least for the start of this.
嫌な予感がしたからお姉ちゃんのスマホを追跡したんだよ。そしたらさっき話してたお家にいるんだもん。びっくりだよ。
いつまで経ってもお前たちが帰ってこないから警察に捜索願いを出すところだったぜ。
屋敷の連中に見つかって騒ぎになる前に出てこい。
それが実は今警備員に追われて隠れてるんです。それにラミー君ともはぐれてしまって。
屋敷の中が騒がしいと思ったらそういうことか。
え？もしかして近くまで来てるんですか？
今屋敷の前にいる。騒ぎを起こされる前に連れ出そうと思ったのだが遅かったようだな。
Deep sigh from the other side of the earpiece filled my heart with remorse.
とにかくまずはラミー君と合流した方がよろしいかと。なんといっても彼は世紀の大怪盗なのですか
そうしたいんですけど、どこにいるのかわからなくて。
そしたらそのお家の監視カメラの映像をお姉ちゃんのスマホで見れるようにするから、それでラミー君がどこにいるか探してよ。
There was the sound of Sally tapping at her keyboard. Almost simultaneously, an app started up on my phone screen. She must have operated it remotely. Various places around the estate were displayed on my screen, and one of the cameras showed Sally and the others outside the gates. They truly come here.
お部屋の中には監視カメラがないみたいだから見られないとこも多いけど、廊下にいる警備員ならバッチリ映ってるでしょ。
Just as Sally said, I could see each corridor and hall and the guards therein. With this, maybe even someone of my caliber could get away to safety. But I couldn't spot Rom and Elmar anywhere. They might have been hiding in a room, just like I was. If that was the case, there was a chance that we wouldn't meet no matter how much time passed unless I took initiative to find them.
まずはラミー君たちを探しに行こうと思います。
探しに行くのはいいが、今自分がどこにいるのか分かってるのか？
Ash's collected voice came through the earpiece.
2階のどこかだとは思うんですが。
それなら部屋のドアを少しだけ開けてみろ。カメラに扉が映っていれば、それで場所がわかる。
I followed Ash's instructions and opened the door slightly. I saw the change in one of the screens.
右下の6番カメラだね。そのカメラは2階の東廊下だってさ。
2階の東廊下。わかった。
I still didn't have a clear grasp of the mansion's layout, but if I could trust my memory of when we first came in, it should be a 3-story building. I gotta go and find Ram and Elmar first. Just as I was about to walk out, I heard the sound of someone walking down the stairs on the other side of the door. It was too noisy to be Ram and Elmar. When I checked the camera, I discovered that a guard was walking down the corridor towards me.
やば、お姉ちゃんがいる部屋の方に来てるよ。早くどっかに隠れて。
But where am I supposed to hide? Under the bed, behind the curtains, behind the door.
状況を記録するのか？
これでいいのか？
Under the bed seems really obvious, right? I don't know if these guys would check under the bed. Behind the curtains? Behind the door? But would behind the door even work? Let's try it. Hiding under the bed or behind the curtains wouldn't do. He'd easily discover me with just one look. The door of this room opened inward to a corner, so it could obscure me completely. So long as he didn't linger, that was my best bet to evade my pursuer. I clung to the wall as I stood to the side of the door's hinges. I held my breath and waited. The door swung open, concealing my form perfectly. I should be fine like this. I listened to the guard entering the room.
ここにもいねえが。ベッドの下に隠れたりはしてないよな。
He grumbled for some time, checking common hiding places like the bed and curtains. Though it was only a minute or two, the time felt stretched to infinity. Eventually, the guard left, irritably slamming the door shut behind him. He'd never noticed me. His footsteps grew faint. Just to be safe, I checked the cameras and saw him disappear near the stairs. He'd given up on this floor entirely. I breathed a sigh of relief. Not a moment later, I caught a glimpse of a familiar green on one of the cameras.
サリー、5番のカメラをズームしてもらえる？
3階ホールのカメラだね。面白いものでも映ってた？
Sally operated the camera and zoomed in. There, in the shadows of the stairs, was Ram.
あのガキ。世紀の大怪盗とか言ってたくせに、しっかりと監視カメラに撮られてるじゃないか。
あ、でも今、カメラに向かって手を振ってましたよ。撮られていることに気づいてて遊んでるようですね。
うわー、最悪。ほんとそういうところが子供なんだよね。
As everyone voiced their opinions, Ram skulked into one of the rooms in the hall while the guards were busy talking to each other.
おいおい、あのガキ、何やってやがるんだ？
ラミー君の職業的に考えて泥棒なのではないかと。
んなことやってねえでさっさと出てこい。サリー、すぐにやめさせろ。
さすがのサリーでもラミー君をハッキングして操れないからね。さっきからスマホにメッセージを送ってるけど反応ないしさ。
仕事中はマナーモードなのでしょうね。
何にせよ、これ以上の騒ぎは勘弁だ。ちょっと屋敷まで行って、あのガキに釘を刺してくる。
おい、これ以上勝手な真似は。
先に勝手なことをしてるのはあのガキだ。余計なことをして迷惑を被るのは俺だぜ。安心しろよ。警察のふりでもして釘を刺してくるだけだ。
うわ、ハミー君の刺す釘ってなんか毒でも塗ってありそうだよね。
だが何が起こるかわからん。ハミエル一人では危険ではないか。
心配してもらって涙が出るね。で、誰がご一緒してくれるってんだい？
少し休憩しましょうか。
これでいいのか？
Okay, who should go with him? Ash, Camus, Sally, Gibb. I guess if you weren't in the trouble, Ash is the fighter of the group. I doubt Camus or Sally would be any good. Make it Ash.
それならアッシュさんがいいと思います。
It would be reassuring to have Ash around if some kind of conflict broke out. I nominated him, but
断る。トラブルはめんどくせえ。
he rejected it flat out.
仕方ないな。それでは私が行こう。警察のふりをするのも慣れているからな。
No, I didn't want to use Gibb because he's... I don't know. With a sigh, Gibb volunteered himself.
次の目的地はどこにする？
これで問題ありませんか？
Didn't think that would make sense necessarily.
ジブさんにお願いします。警察のふりをするなら元警官のジブさんがいた方が説得力が出そうですから。
まあ、他のやつよりは本物らしく見えるかもな。わか
った。私が一緒に行こう。
After about 5 minutes trickled by, there was a stir outside the room I was hiding in. When I checked the cameras, I spotted Hamil and Gibb in the first floor hall. I opened my door slightly to listen to their quarrel.
だから、この屋敷のセキュリティは万全だ。欧州警察なんかに心配されるような問題は何もない。
いやね、そう言っている家に限ってあっさりと奴にしてやられるんですよ。怪盗ラミーキャットってコソ泥なんですけど、知りません？
そんなやつ知らないよ。とにかく、この屋敷は外にも中にも監視カメラが設置してあって警備は万全だから、もう帰ってくれないか。
へえ、屋敷の中にも外にも監視カメラがね。よほど人に恨まれているってことですかね。
そんなことはない。だいたい、あんたら本当に欧州警察の人間なのが、どこかで見たことあるような顔なんだが。
The guard grew suspicious of Hamil's behavior. No matter how articulate he may be, the act would come to naught if they were recognized as fugitives. Withdraw before you're exposed. Keep your act up. Oh.
疲れたから少し休む。
これで問題ないか。
That'll be obvious that that they're fakes, I guess.
下手にごまかすと正体がバレるかもしれません。そのまま警官の演技を続けてください。
For now, all I could do was put my faith in Hamiel's skill as a con artist. He resumed talking, just a touch more casual than earlier.
見たことある顔あはは、そりゃそうでしょう。なんせ我々はこの屋敷のご主人と知り合いですからね。
主人の知り合いだとは。
ほら、ここのご主人、裏ではいろいろとやらかしてるでしょ。あれをもみ消してるのって実は我々なんですよ。もちろん善意でね。
Yes, goodwill.
そうなのか。
The story seemed to make sense in the guard's mind. He sounded like he was beginning to believe Hamiel's words. We hadn't been found out, but Hamiel and the guard's exchange was still stuck in a deadlock on the first floor.
ちょっとさっきから何なのさ、この三文芝居は。てか、怪盗ラミーキャットって誰のこと？
Suddenly, Ram's voice was in my ear. He must have noticed Hamiel and Gib and switched on his earpiece.
ラミー君、どうしてエルマ君と一緒じゃないの？そこ3階でしょ？一体何してるの？
I gave a succinct summary of the situation to Ram. He waved at the security camera.
ちょっと野暮用があって別行動してるんだ。エルマーには勝手に動くなって言っておいたから、多分2階のどこかに隠れてると思うよ。
いいから、そのガキ連れてさっさと屋敷から出てこい。
あれ？アッシュの兄貴もいんの？いや、屋敷から出たくても、警備員が結構しつこくてそうもいかないんだって。
そんな奴ら黙らせればいいだろう。おい、ジブ。とりあえずその目の前の警備員をぶん殴れ。
アッシュさん、ダメです。これ以上騒ぎを起こせば、エルマー君にも危険が及ぶかもしれません。
めんどくせえ。
とにかく、まずはエルマー君と合流して、なんとか外に逃がしてあげないと。
わかってるって。じゃあ、ちゃちゃっと行って見つけてくるよ。大事なことは忘れないようにね。
これでいいのか？
Well, let's trust him.
エルマー君のこと、よろしくね。
任せといて。
Yeah, that makes sense for Ash, though. He's a very straightforward person. Ram left the room he was in, but luck didn't smile upon him, and he ran headfirst into 2 brawny guards outside the room. Oh, okay. Well, obviously, that was the wrong decision.
どこに行くつもりだ？
これで OK？
Alright, well, maybe I should go.
待って。私が探しに行った方がいいかもしれない。
なんで？
ラミー君のいる部屋の前に警備員が2人いるの。このまま出たらラミー君が捕まっちゃうよ。
マジで？しつこいな。でもそれじゃあここから動けないじゃん。
エルマー君は私が見つけるから、ラミー君はしばらくそこに隠れてて。
本当に大丈夫？あんま無理しないでよね。
ラミー君もね。
As I checked over the security cameras, a short silhouette flashed across the screen, one screen. It hid on the opposite side of the second floor.
エルマー君を見つけた。
今ちょっとだけ映った子だね。2階の西廊下の一番端の部屋に隠れてるみたいだから、お姉ちゃんのところからだと他の階を通らないといけないよ。
ですが、3階には警備員が2人もいますし、そこを通り抜けるのは無理そうですね。
Just like Kamu said, it was likely impossible to cross over without those guards discovering me. Meanwhile, there was only one guard on the first floor, and he had his back turned to deal with Hamiel and Gib. With any luck, I could pass by unnoticed.
これから1階の警備員の後ろを通って反対側の廊下に移動します。ジブさん、警備員の気を引いてもらえますか？
わかった。やってみよう。
Gib took a step forward and abruptly grabbed the guard by his collar.
何をする？
楽しいおしゃべりの時間は終わりだ。私はそこのやさ男のように気が長くないのでな。
あんた本当に欧州警察の警官なのか？やってることはマフィアと変わらないじゃないか。
警 警官が皆正義の味方だと思うなよ。合法的にお前を始末することもできるんだぞ。
Don't assume all officers are advocates of justice.
おい、ちょっと勘弁してくれよ。
Under Gibbs' overwhelming pressure, the guard buckled and completely quailed. This was my chance. While Gibb messed with the guard, I left the room and sprinted to the corridor where we saw Elmar. I know, I was going to make that comment too. I slipped into the room where Elmar had taken cover moments ago. I finally found him, anxious and anxiously shaking.
お姉ちゃん、よかった。無事だったんだね。
エルマー君も無事でよかった。さあ、早くラミー君と合流して、ここを出よう。
師匠はどこにいるの？
今、3階の部屋に隠れてるの。
I checked on Ron through the cameras. Just then, the two guards preparing to enter the room. There were two guards preparing to enter a room he was in, or he was hiding in.
ラミー君絶対絶命のピンチだよ。警備員が2人中に入ろうとしてる。逃げて逃げて。
嘘、マジで？ちょっとなんとかしてくんない？
At this rate, they'll find him. We had to divert the guards' attention elsewhere. Please ring the doorbell. Can we cause a power outage? Can we make a loud sound? Oh, the doorbell wouldn't work, I wouldn't think.
状況を記録するのか？
これで問題ありませんか？
Power outage? Sally said it was hard though, so loud sound means that Kama would have to do something outside. Can Kama do something? Yeah.
神さん、何か大きな音の出るものを持ってませんか？できればあまり危険ではないもので。
大きな音ですか？あいにくと爆弾は切らしてまして、おもちゃのような爆竹程度しかありませんが。
それって大きな音は出ますか？
まあ、それなりには音は出ますが、試してみます？
はい、お願いします。
30 seconds later, a roaring explosion resounded within the neighborhood. The window panes trembled, and even the mansion itself jolted.
神さん、今のってただの爆竹ですよね。
はい、そのつもりだったのですが、少し危険なものが混ざっていたようです。でも大丈夫です。ちょっと庭に穴が開いた程度ですから。
That doesn't sound remotely close to all right. The explosion of Kama's violent firecrackers must have reached the ears of the guards on the third floor. They fled downstairs to check what had happened.
やった。警備員が下に降りていく。お姉ちゃん、今のうちに師匠と合流しようよ。
Elmore tugged on my hand. The camp was always ready to blow something up, it seems. Hurry to the third floor, wait a while longer.
ちょっと待って。もう少し様子を見た方がいいかもしれない。
I stopped Elmar by his shoulder before he rushed out of the room recklessly. I checked the cameras and saw a guard coming out of the room next to ours. Judging by his big yawn, he'd been taking a nap. The new guard went down the stairs and made his way to the first floor hall.
隣の部屋で寝てたのかよ。危なかったね、お姉ちゃん。
Once we were sure all the guards had assembled in the grand hall on the first floor, we made our move.
ハミエルさん、ジブさん、私はこれからラミー君と合流します。二人はもう屋敷から逃げてください。
だが、まだ君たちが中に。
さっきからサイレンの音が近づいてきてます。
おいおい、まさか本物の警察のお出ましかよ。
うん、 多分さっきの爆発を聞いて近所の誰かが通報したんだと思う。
確かにもうすぐここに到着しそうですね。
ああ、さっさと逃げた方がいいだろ
みんなのおかげで警備員を陽動できました。私もラミー君と合流して逃げますから、今のうちに逃げてください。
それじゃそうさせてもらうぜ。
わかった。くれぐれも無茶はするな。
As our conversation went on, the blaring sirens grew even louder.
おい旦那、応援が来たみたいだ。行くぞ。
At Hamiel's prompt, the two left the mansion with ease. They should be able to escape without a hitch, passing as officers to the very end.
さあ姉ちゃん、僕たちも逃げようぜ。どこから脱出する？
Let's leave by the front door, maybe the second floor windows. The third floor is our exit.
疲れたから少し休もっか。
これで問題ないか。
Well, the front door seems weird. Didn't we say the second floor windows had bars? I guess the third floor?
3階から逃げよう。
3階から？
うん。今ラミー君がいるホールの外ってバルコニーになってるでしょ。そこしか外に出られる場所はないかなって。
さすがにそれは無理だと思って言わなかったんだけど、その覚悟があるってことだね。
どうせこのままじゃ捕まってしまうから、一か八かやってみる。
それじゃあ時間との勝負だ。全速力でここまで走ってきてよ。僕が絶対に逃がしてあげるからさ。
Elmar and I rushed into the corridor and sprinted to the third floor where Rom was waiting for us.
おい、あんなところにいたぞ。逃がすな。捕まえろ。
Boy, the voice levels are all over the place. The guards noticed us and broke into our run.
おっと、ずいぶんたくさんのお客さんを連れてきたね。
On the third floor, Rom grinned cheerfully, hearing the hectic stomps of the guards ascending the stairs.
師匠は笑ってる場合じゃないよ。
At the sound of numerous footsteps closing in, Elmar's face paled.
それじゃ、華麗なる脱出劇を始めよっか。
We returned to running with Rom in the lead. Without a second to spare, we rushed out onto the third floor balcony.
止まっちゃダメだ。走って。
師匠、走れって言ってももう行き止まりじゃ。
ジャンプしてあの木に飛び移るんだ。木の向こう側に塀があるから、そこから逃げられる。
Rom pointed past the edge of the balcony. There was an impressive tree that looked like it could easily withstand our weight. If we were able to leap onto it, we could break out from the entire state grounds by jumping to and off the outer walls. There was one problem. There was roughly a 2-meter gap between the balcony and the tree. If we fell from this height, graces were the least of our worries.
僕が先に飛んで受け止めるから、二人は僕を信じて手すりの上からジャンプして。
Leaving those words behind, Rom maintained his momentum, leapt onto the balcony railing, and jumped with all his might. His body soared as if gravity couldn't hold him down. In fact, he made it look effortless. He landed on the thick tree branch without a sound and turned around.
エルマ、こっちだ。
For a moment, Elmar faltered, but the voices closing in from behind us spurned him on. He placed a foot on the railing and jumped resolutely. The boy flew through the air, desperately reaching out his hand. Rom extended out his arm and caught Elmar. Elmar managed to cling to the tree branch without injury. I was up next.
Oi! いたぞ!
That was the exact moment when the guards finally ran out onto the balcony. There was no time for second thoughts. I scrambled onto the railing and kicked as hard as I could, like a standing long jump. For an instant, the faraway night sky was all I saw. My skirt and hair fluttered in the breeze. In front of me was Rom holding out his hand. I reached out to catch it. But I crashed right into the tree branch. It creaked loudly as if it was going to snap from the impact, but I grabbed it and clung on for dear life.
ちょっとお姉ちゃん、なんかすごい音したけど大丈夫？
Of course she couldn't catch his hand.
なんとか。
I wouldn't exactly call it an elegant landing, but I was just able to swing onto the tree branch. The bad news was that the branch was bending at an alarming angle, about to snap at any time due to my body slam and the weight of 3 people.
これなら警備員も追ってこれないね。
お姉ちゃん大丈夫？
My chest ached from the crash, but it wasn't so severe that I couldn't move. Enraged roaring resounded from the balcony.
ガキどもが逃げたぞ！塀の上だ！
と、早くここから逃げるよ。
Rom nimbly leaped from the tree branch to the top of the wall, then dropped to the ground without a sound. If I didn't hurry, I would lose sight of his back as it blended into the darkness of the night. I chased him single-mindedly. Switzerland, July 20th, 2028, 23:47. Yeah, boy, they really weren't in there for very long.
とりあえず記録しておけ。
これで問題ありませんか？
Okay, with that, I can sort of feel myself drifting, so why don't we
okay?
stop it there? This is
では
meowmurai. You've
後
been
ほど
watching
合流しましょう。
Despera Drops, running on Nintendo Switch 2.
Despera
Anyway, I hope you
Drops.
enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream. Well, what a caper this game is.